Hey, Jennifer.
Hello.
Welcome to Friday. How are you?
Surviving.
Yeah.
Just getting through the week. Got a big weekend coming up, so lots
hmm
to do.
It feels like a super long week, and which is weird because Monday was like a holiday, and
hmm
yet this week feels very long. And I'm also over the weather. Like I'm over it.
I'm over the
Over it.
weather, and I'm over all of the germs
The
that
germs.
everybody is having and
Yes.
bringing it into my house and my life.
Yeah. It's just wild. Um, And I'm over the swirl of all the things that we're hearing coming out of Washington, D.C. every single day. It seems like every single day I don't have a high enough quotient of outrage to spread around to all of the things
Yes.
that I could be outraged about all the time, and like I take heart in the like little battles that are won in the courts, but it seems like every one of those is responded to by a battle lost in the courts and um coupled by new battles that are being waged. And we know that this is the strategy, like this is the
Oh yeah.
thing that they're doing to wear us down. And you had mentioned a thing that I've been hearing a lot too as kind of leaders in the like local resistance spaces, just people saying that they just feel overwhelmed and helpless, and what can we do, what can we as individuals do, what can we as just a little slice of the population here in Midland do. And you put together some thoughts about that, and I was hoping you could share a little bit about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've had a lot of I mean, I think we both have, and then other leaders that we talk to, it's like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And it's like, well, we breathe for starters. Um
Don't forget to breathe.
yeah, don't
Yeah.
forget to breathe because the whole freaking out thing isn't going to help us. Which like talking about the outrage thing, my outrage meter is broken, so I almost don't even. I don't even get outraged. It's like, oh yeah, here we go again. What's next? Okay, here's what I can do about it. And it sounds so terrible, but I mean, it's saving my mental health a little bit. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and I'm still
But
doing the things I need to do. I'm just
yeah,
not freaking out about it.
I know. And I was just wondering, like, as you say that, like, what part of that is like being numb or becoming just like, I think somebody mentioned, I can't validate this because I haven't been on the news at all today, but like Steve Bannon like did a Nazi kind of hand gesture, and they were just like, well, that of course, and
What you gonna
our
do?
yeah, our reactions to these things, uh, of course they become like numb and like,
hmm
but then the danger of that is like that becomes complacency,
Yeah,
and like we actually, you know, build giant blanket forts and try to just just wait out the whole of this administration, which is
yeah.
not the right response. So I
No,
know.
because there's no waiting them out. It's
Yeah.
not like if we just hunker down and wait 4 years or even two. I've heard some people, and unfortunately, it feels like I've heard this from Democratic leadership. Just 2 more years and we'll win the midterms. Well, my friend, if we
Yeah.
do not do anything,
Yeah.
there's a good chance that elections will be messed up to the point where our midterms won't matter. There will be so many things that have changed and so many people hurt and so many norms and whatever, like just everything will have changed,
Yeah.
and we don't have 2 years. So sorry. That's why I
I
made
know. Yeah.
I made this list of things for the resistance tool belt. And it's funny because
Yeah.
I definitely have heard, like, a lot of people like to use the word resistance, and then I hear other people like, oh my god, that's so silly. And it's like, well, what else do you want to call
What
it? Like,
other
what does it
word?
matter
Yeah.
what we call it?
I feel like that is some of the like challenges in the democratic spaces, is we get in these like pedantic arguments about the definition of words,
Yeah,
and we're
let's
actually not.
workshop this message
I
before we
know,
do it.
and
And we've already
yes.
moved on from that.
No, Lord, let's just talk to people in plain language and use the words that come to us, and like stop it with this, you know, I switching words because you think that's the thing that's going to make a difference.
Uh-huh.
So like, everyone knows what we mean by resistance. We call it resistance, and so let's
Yeah.
move on. Um, And I totally agree about that 2 year thing. Like I'm kind of tired of hearing like there's nothing we can do for 2 years because and I think that that's some of like there's a little bit of like optimism in the Democratic Party as if like our old institutions are just gonna like be as solid as they ever were, right?
They,
And
but
that
they weren't. But they weren't
yeah,
solid. They were untested. And
yeah,
our Democratic
exactly.
leaders are like, don't worry, friends, it's all going to be fine. Those institutions are going to hold. No,
No,
they
I
didn't
know.
hold because they were strong. They held because nobody was testing them.
Exactly, exactly. And so like to assume that like of course I hope that our institutions like voting and all of that will be solid in 2 years and that we'll be able to have victories at the ballot box and I know a lot of people in the Democratic Party progressive spaces are just like, we cannot assume. Like, look at all the dismantling of everything. Like, the courts have been literally dismantled. The whole idea of checks and balances has been just completely blown up. And those are our institutional things, let alone like free speech and all of like the press, like all of
Oh
those
my gosh.
institutions
I
are
hear everybody
completely
like,
eroded.
yes, I hear so many people like, oh, I'm most concerned about reproductive rights, or I'm most concerned about education, or I'm most concerned about healthcare. I'm most concerned about the press. And
Yeah,
even though that's sort of like a it's like I think people don't think about it because it like doesn't immediately affect you. It doesn't change whether you get your health care or you can afford groceries or whatever, but it's gonna mean a whole heck of a lot. Like the press is already even before Trump started his pressure campaigns, they were already not an institution that was going to help Democrats or help independents or help democracy. Yeah, they leaned more towards that way, but they've made so many concessions, even back before Trump was putting pressure on them,
yeah,
that
yeah,
you can't trust that
yeah.
they're going to do that. And now it's just he's suing them left and right. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the thing. You want to get me worked up? Let's talk about the press and freedom
I
of speech. And oh my god,
yeah,
I'm so
I
worried about
totally
that.
agree. I totally agree. It's
Yeah.
like we've lost our grip on what like the single version of the truth is in the
Mm-hmm.
world. And that we used to be what we looked to
Yeah.
our free press for. And yes, we knew that there was like, bias and slanting going
Bias
on,
and
but
yeah. I mean, we can even look at that. Like, you look at what the press was saying in the 1960s and 1970s, and like, we're so many years beyond that, and we can look back and be like, no, they weren't giving us the whole truth. So it's not
yeah,
that I think the press is perfect. They're
sure.
not.
Yeah,
But a free press is still an incredibly important thing. And that's like we talked about. That's why we came up with this resistance tool belt,
right.
to help people uh, combat some of this and just know what they can do. And not all of it's going to happen right now, but there's a list
Yeah.
of things that we can put in our tool belt and be ready to use when the time comes.
Totally. And those are things that are like that like make a difference. So when people come to us as kind of like community leaders and they're like, you know, very anxious and worried about all the things as they should be and they're like what can we do, and we know that like action is the antidote to that
Mm-hmm.
feeling, right? Like
Yeah.
there's nothing more that can amplify sort of that the feeling of helplessness, like lack of ability to take action, right? And to do it
Mm-hmm.
and to be in that space by yourself, so like lack of community and lack of action. So there we're not helpless, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there are things that we can do, and every little bit solidifies our country and every little bit like moves us in that right direction. It doesn't have to be because one thing doesn't solve everything that you should just do nothing, right? And so yeah, why don't you share with us a couple of things in your tool belt for
Yeah.
action and resistance?
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of them. Do you want me to just say one and then we'll talk about it, or just kind of list them and we'll go back and talk about the more important ones?
Why don't you list all of them and then we'll
Okay.
just like jump in on a couple. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So very basic things. This is beginner steps for the resistance, but write and call your representatives or show ups, whether that's to town halls, to their offices, to events that they're at, whatever. Write them, call them, show up, and let them know how you feel. Protesting, that can be great big protests in state capitals. That can be little protests on a street corner in your own town. And you can even protest at the offices of the people that represent you. Boycotts, you can boycott corporations, you can boycott certain actions, you can boycott certain goods. Picketing, similar to protesting, but a lot of time that's like an event or a place of work, like, I don't know, a Tesla plant. Just throwing that out there. So yeah, so striking, that could be whether it's where you work or like you take a strike from school and all the teachers and all the students walk out, or you take a strike from your daily life and let everybody know how much work you actually do for them. You can speak out publicly, whether it's social media, your local paper, all sorts of ways to do that. Stay informed. Everybody's got to protect their mental health, but if you don't know what's going on, you can't be an effective a warrior for this situation. Peaceful civil disobedience. That's MLK was a king at that. He knew what he was doing, and he did a lot of that. And that's maybe we're not there yet, but that's something that could come up for sure. Volunteer, whether we're talking about with a political group, like you and I do a lot of, or just even soup kitchens and food pantries and other ways that you're helping your community, especially now because we're going to need so many other resources to help them. Join any, a group, whether it's a political group or an issue group or just a support group of some kind for vulnerable populations. Display your resistance, wear t-shirts and pins and hats and whatever, like, let's counter those MAGA hats out there. And art, making art is resistance. And last, like I already said, breathe. Self-care is resistance because you have to take care of yourself before you can do anything else.
Absolutely. I love the quote from Audre Lorde, self-care is an act of political warfare, right?
Yeah.
Because yes, if we're not healthy um and I mean that's like breathing and finding the mental health and centering, but also physical health, right? Like feeling physically fit enough, right, to do the actions that you might want to do. I personally like to lift weights every morning. It makes me feel fierce. And it's a really cool way to start the day. And I feel like I need to stay as fierce as I can right now,
Mm-hmm.
physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all the things.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about the first one that you said, because this one comes up a lot. It's come up forever, this idea of like writing or calling your reps. And I think that, it comes up because it's it works, right? So it's like, even though somebody might roll their eyes and be like, oh, Sarah and Jennifer, you're always telling me to call
Yeah.
my reps, like what else can I do?
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing and the truth, and the thing that happened recently, right? So we know that as all of this was coming down right after the inauguration, we started to like do our kind of typical resistance work, particularly around all the really terrible cabinet nominations that were coming out. And we like literally blew up the phone system for our senators and our representatives. Like you could not get even a message out on the
Yeah.
phone system to Peters or Slotkin. It just literally like blew up. I think it was like hundreds of times the amount they
Mm-hmm.
would normally get those phone calls
Yeah.
at the switchboard came in during that time. And our message was like, hey, look, we want you to use whatever is at your disposal to make sure it's clear that these nominations are not business as normal. So like
Mm-hmm.
don't vote yes for things that seem a little bit less like harmful, and also um stall and delay and use all the tools that you have. And it worked. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
the thing that like I'm keep falling back on when I feel helpless, is the fact that um our representatives listened. They listened across the country. The Democratic senators like held the floor for 30 hours, and yes, the people still got voted in. The full
Mm-hmm.
cabinet kind of continues to be voted in, but like there's no reason for us to make that easy for them. And
Yeah,
by us calling and writing and just making our voices heard, like we saw a real reaction in Washington D.C. And that's so important to do, even if it's like on your own side, people. Like I have your back if you do these things. We're here to support you back home, and that's so
yeah.
important. It's so important.
And conversely, even as an example, we've talked about our Congresswoman Kristen McDonald-Rivet voted for the Lake and Riley Act, which we do not support. Um, I do think that in some respects, we're not going to go into that whole act. Everybody has very strong opinions for and against, and I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. I'm
Right.
not for it, but I'm also understanding that there was a lot of misinformation against it that wasn't true. But anyway, my point is, I had some people talk to her, and she said, I got a lot of phone calls
Yeah.
saying that they wanted me to vote for that. And
Yeah.
and you guys who were against it, you didn't call me. And so
Right.
that's not the only reason she voted for it. I'm not saying that had she gotten a ton more phone calls against it, but it didn't help. She had
Yeah.
no basis for saying, I can't vote for this because so many of my constituents are against it. She had the exact opposite data to tell her to go the other way.
Yeah.
So even if you think your Democratic representative is going to vote the way you feel because you're both Democrats, you
Hmm.
cannot rest on that. You can't.
Yeah. And even if they do vote the way that you would want ideologically, like calling and sending notes and all the things can give them the backup to know, like, okay, I know that like this is going to be unpopular for this group of folks that I
Mm-hmm.
represent, but it's going to be popular for this group of folks. And if we
Yeah,
just stay quiet about those things, then they won't be able to like know that, they
yeah,
have the support that they need at home. um yeah, I think that, one I heard somebody recently say that they wake up in the morning and they call their representatives right now. They literally like, I'm going to make my phone calls. And it's super easy. You just call and you talk to a staffer and you're like, hey, I'm calling about, you know, this nominee or this bill or this issue, and give your name and where you live, and it just goes on record that that is
yeah.
how you feel. It's not an intimidating process at all. But you can also email if you want, but like
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing that definitely has has a result to it that
Yeah,
you can do. It's why you keep hearing about it, right? It's why people keep hearing about it,
yeah. And
and we
and
keep
like
telling people to do it.
you can I'm talking to the people out there, not Sarah, because she already knows all the things and I've already told her and she's told me, and like, yeah, we've gone over it. But I've made TikToks. I've made videos. It's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, it's on TikTok. It's on our Beyond Resistance pod. It's on my personal page. Like it's
Yeah.
everywhere. And I know Sarah's campaign, her old campaign page has probably talked about this stuff
Mhm.
before too. And the Women of Michigan Action Network has talked about it. So
Yeah.
my point is there is a list out there, videos, physical lists, things you can print off. The information on all the tips and tricks on how to call your reps, it exists. It's out there. Just find it.
Yeah.
We've already done the research for you,
Yeah.
and we've
Yeah.
made it easy. So please do it.
Yeah. Agree. The other thing that caught my attention as you're reading your list was around volunteerism and like supporting locally. And I really think that that's something that I've been thinking a lot about,
Mm-hmm.
especially as we're hearing about all these decisions that are being made and these cuts that are being made in the federal government, and like people getting laid off and losing their jobs, but also people like losing access to services that are keeping them
Mm-hmm.
alive in some ways, or keeping them healthy in other ways, or in a housed, and all of the things. So there's going to be something, and it's here now, and it's going to have to grow around mutual aid, and how we just like how we how we weathered the storm of this administration together by supporting each other, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
love the idea of like local volunteerism, not just for like political specific
Yeah,
reasons, but for local groups that are supporting, community members who are in need, or, donating to those local groups that are supporting those folks in need, like food pantries and housing organizations and LGBTQ and trans like support groups and immigration support, like all of those things.
Hmm.
Um, because, the Coalition for Choice here in Michigan is a great group to donate to, that helps support women to get abortion health care and all of those things, because we're going to have to be in a space where we counted on our federal government for some of that aid and support. We're not going to get it, and it's going to be more and more and more. And so being ready for that is like, should be like, being able to support that should be part of our tool belt for resistance too.
Yeah, and like I really think about I'm almost 50, hate to admit it. It's not like a number I enjoy, but I think back to when I was 18 years old and I was pregnant and I had to drop out of college and give up my scholarship and move back home, and I really didn't have a ton of support, and was kind of told you need to move out because you're having a baby. And just I think back to that 18-year-old girl. She
Mm-hmm.
would not have survived without WIC. She would
Mm-hmm.
not have survived without Medicaid.
Yeah.
um, she would not have survived without subsidized housing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about, it's this whole pro-life movement that, oh, you've got to keep your baby. Well, how are you going to keep your baby if you can't afford to?
Yeah.
And I'm super for helping people with abortion services and everything that they need for that, because me, I'm super pro-choice, but pro-choice means choice, and I want people to
Mhm.
have the choice to keep that baby.
Well, and notwithstanding, pro-life should mean life.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it should not just
exactly.
be
How pro-life
birth.
is it to say, well, we
Yeah,
don't care if you can feed the kid, you just got to
exactly.
give birth to it.
Exactly. Yeah. I agree. I agree. I mean, and I think there's like a reciprocity that can happen, right? Like, you, had the services when I was a younger mother, around like health insurance for my kids, and the diaper alliance type groups
Hmm.
when we first moved back to Michigan, and we had these babies and no jobs, and we had the benefit of some family members who actually gave us housing when we did not have a place to live and no jobs
Hmm.
to pay for it. So there was mutual aid going on for me and my family back then, and we have to like pay that forward. And like, that's always been the case, sadly, but also it's going to be more and more and more the case now that
Harder and
we
harder.
know about all these people are
Yeah,
losing their jobs or losing their services. I think that is, it's just like, it is a tool that needs to go into our tool belt,
yeah,
and it is part of the resistance movement to like
yeah.
really just planfully like support one another through these times.
Yeah,
So
my diaper alliance was me going to visit my grandpa and him slipping 20 bucks in the diaper bag every time I
yeah.
go see him.
uh,
And it's like, but not everybody has that grandpa,
yeah.
you know, and we need to help out, whether it's the diapers or whether there's some other issue. There's a lot of kids with disabilities and their parents rely on a lot of assistance because it's expensive to be disabled in this country. It's very
Mhm.
expensive to be disabled in this country.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we're just going to have to we're going to have to pick up the slack in some way,
Yeah.
because the government's going to give us a hell of a lot of slack because they don't give a shit about anybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we just that's one of the things. The last thing that kind of perked, it's all good. The whole list is amazing. The
Yeah.
last one that perked up my attention was joining a group. And so
Hmm.
the thing that I thought about when I think about joining a group and how important that is like, if you're feeling helpless and you're feeling like to do anything, or you're feeling hopeless because of the situation that's going on, one of the most powerful things that you can do is physically be in the space with other people who are aligned with your values and with that feeling, who are willing to engage with you in these ideas about how to take action. And just finding that community is so, so, so important. And being and like physically showing up to that community, when they have a call to action, coming to it, like physically being there. And I worry about the folks who are home alone, like scrolling on, Facebook or whatever, just getting more and more and more agitated alone.
Yeah,
That is a
that doom
very
scrolling can
hard
really do
place
a
to be.
number.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I mean, I have to pull myself out of the doom scroll, on a daily basis typically, but I have a really robust community